A powerhouse matchup coming to you in the SEC title game on CBS, LSU and Georgia. Coach O has the Tigers playing inspired football, and he wants nothing more than to deliver a national title to that crazed LSU fan base.
We got to win. Our goal is to beat Georgia, and we're not going to get all the stuff outside to make it too big of a game than it already is.
Pickens, he dives, touchdown.
There is no greater passion for a game than any place in the country. When you talk about LSU and the University of Georgia, you earn the opportunity to play in this game.
Burrow throwing far side and touchdown Tigers!
Heisman Trophy frontrunner Joe Burrow has been the story of the year thus far in college football.
I think he's got just a supreme ability for a feel for the game.
Everything you want a quarterback to be, athleticism to run, scramble, make all the throws. He does it with confidence and poise.
Burrow throws over the top.
He's one of the most important recruits in LSU history in my mind. He was able to change LSU's offense from a pro-style offense to a spread.
Throws to wide open. He waltzes into the end zone.
SEC championship is here. We're playing a really good team, one of the best defenses in the country. So, this is what we work for. So we'll be ready for it.
And welcome to this hour of HQ. Amanda Guerra, Brady Quinn. I almost said that I was a bit under the weather.
You're playing injured.
I was.
Yeah, you're playing hurt right now.
Yeah,
so
I'm better though.
Yeah.
Much
you're
like DeAndre Swift. Anyway, so I am very excited because this half hour we are going to break down this game, the SEC on CBS. This, Brady, is the game I think we've been waiting for weeks now. When we knew this was the road to LSU, Georgia, we are finally here. Now, I'm going to go to this with you because Brady sends us emails. He put an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, but that's the best way to describe it.
That is the best way to describe the LSU offense, right? We're going against the Georgia defense, number one on each side as far as offensively in the SEC, defensively in the SEC when you look at these two teams. I think the bigger picture question you have to start off by asking is, what's on the line in this game? Outside of an SEC championship game, if Georgia wins,
everything,
they're in. We know they're going to be in the college football playoff. It appears they're in now, but they can't afford a loss and obviously still stay in the number 4 spot. Could LSU, though, afford a loss this game and still make it in? I think so.
I think so.
I think they could lose to Georgia, and they could both end up getting in. Now, LSU would probably drop to 4, but I think with their resume, and if that was their only loss, you could probably make the case that LSU could still afford to lose this one and get in. All that being said, I don't think that's how this game goes. LSU has played some good defenses earlier this year. They played Florida, they played Auburn, Alabama, for example. And even though Alabama struggled defensively a little bit, they've still been able to put up points in production. Joe Burrow's been phenomenal. He's going to win the Heisman. We know that. It just comes down to whether or not Georgia can keep pace with LSU and if the defense can get enough turnovers or potentially enough stops. That's what this game's going to come down to.
Ed Orgeron was saying that, he was asked, obviously, the implications. Could you guys lose this game and still be in the top 4? Of course, he said, we're not looking at that. We're not looking at it. But, of course, that's in the back of their heads. So let's talk specifically about LSU's offense versus Georgia's defense. LSU likes to spread it out. Georgia does man coverage. How do you think this is going to match up? I
think that's the hard part for the Georgia defense is when you look at their top 5 receivers for LSU this year, they all have 30-plus receptions. And that's obviously Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Terrace Marshall, Thaddeus Moss, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. All of them have 30 or more receptions. There's not another team in the SEC that has 5 receivers or 5 players who have caught that many passes. So not only do they spread out teams, they also utilize the strengths of all their talented players. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he is the secret weapon to me because he's a mismatch for opponents, especially linebackers when they try to match him up. He gives those coverage indicators for the quarterback so he knows where to go with the football, but also the ground game too. 16 touchdowns rushing this year. He's added balance to this LSU offense. I think that's what makes them dangerous. Aside from Joe Burrow, how accurate he is, the decision-making ability that he has, getting the football to the playmakers, it's been Edwards-Helaire being able to provide enough of a running game where defenses can't just drop 8 or can't try to put pressure on Burrow to get the football out. There's seams, there's mismatches, and it all starts at the running back position. So Joe Burrow, he'll continue to be the story of this offense. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, though, he's that secret weapon that they've got, and they utilize in a bunch of different ways.
So those were the strengths, obviously strength and strength, weakness and weakness, the LSU defense. And we could say the Georgia offense. You have Jake Fromm, but then they're also playing injured. You have Lawrence Cager's out. Pickens only going to play the second half there.
That's right.
DeAndre Swift is injured. He's still going to play. So how do you see that matching up?
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest question in this matchup is if the LSU defense that likes to play a lot of man-to-man coverage is going to be able to have their way with the receivers or the pass catchers for Georgia, because Pickens won't be there till the second half. Cager is going to be out for this game. Obviously, we've known that. And if Swift isn't 100%, look, he's the best running back in the SEC, running the football and even catching the football out of the backfield. That's another mismatch for most defenses. But Jake Fromm not having these two, at least for the extent of the game, if you're talking about Cager, but Pickens as well, they're his top two receivers, it's a big question mark. And look, Fromm's been phenomenal. Since their loss, 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. The completion percentage people have got on him about because it's been low, sub 50 in a number of games. But the bottom line is this is a young group. This is going to be a tough challenge for them. Will they be able to step up to the call? We'll have to wait and see, but that's one of the reasons why I think LSU's defense will be able to do enough with Dave Aranda, his scheme, but really a lot of man-to-man coverage, and put too much pressure on Fromm and this Georgia offense to be able to put up enough production to win this game.
So let's talk about where the game is being played. It's in Atlanta. You know, Georgia does well in neutral sites, which is great. They're 7-4 under Kirby Smart.
Sure.
Awesome. This is essentially, though, a home game for them. Does that give them any sort of advantage, or do you think that LSU fan base is going to travel so well you're not going to know the difference?
Usually these conference championship games, you don't notice it quite as well. It's pretty much like at most neutral site games. They try to be split down the middle. Now, maybe you'll see a few extra Georgia fans, but I don't think it's going to be any sort of decisive advantage that's going to give Georgia the edge in this one. Again, I keep going back to the fact that you look at this LSU offense. They've played some tough defenses. No one's been able to stop them, maybe slow them down to some degree. And that's what I think the challenge is for Georgia. They don't necessarily get pressure on opposing quarterbacks overly well. There's not a Chase Young on their sideline to get pressure. And so they've got a ton of team speed. They play well as a unit. And I do think Kirby Smart will have his moments versus this Joe Burrow-led offense. But to me, it's just not going to be enough to get the win.
All right, I'm going to get your picks here in a little bit when we talk to Tim Doyle, because I want to know what you are picking in this game. We're going to put you on the hot seat here. You can see the most SEC championships of all time. Of course, Alabama there with 8. They're not in it. Neither is Florida. But then you got LSU and Georgia right next to one another. Joining us now on the line is Gary Danielson. He gets the call for this game, the SEC on CBS. So, Gary, I just have to know on a personal note, is this the game you've looked forward to the most this year?
Well, it's a fun game. I'll have to admit that. We're pretty fortunate to do it. And, you know, this will be my actually 15th one. I did one at ABC and now 14 here with CBS. So it's always a competitive game, and it means in the southeast part of the country, you know, because college football means so much, this game means a lot. So it's a fun game to do.
So, Gary, so much of the conversation is focused around Joe Burrow, just how incredible he is. Obviously, the Heisman front runner. How do you think Georgia contains him?
I think they contain him as a unit. That's the only chance they have. You know, they do not have, when you look at their front 5 or 6 rushers that rush the passer all the time, you know, one of those difference makers where the other team goes, oh, you know, how do we keep a guy in for this one? There's not a guy like that. But all season I've been talking about that their unit has got great speed. They work well as a unit. But, you know, the more you look at them and the more you watch them, they do really have stars. I mean, Tyler Clark, Jordan Davis, Rice and Crowder, their 2 inside linebackers are really good players. Their 2 safeties are as good as anybody in college football, and they're veterans. So they have to work as a unit, and they know that they're not going to, you know, shut down LSU. They're just too powerful with the rules of offense now in college football. So I look at it as part of the way to slow down LSU is the Georgia offense has to be part of the way to stop the LSU offense.
Gary, the game location, I was just talking about this with Brady, technically a neutral site, and historically Georgia does well under Kirby Smart at those sites. This is pretty much a home game for Georgia, although LSU travels very well. Being at these games here, do you think this gives Georgia any sort of an edge?
I do. I think they're very familiar playing there. They've played the SEC championships. Now, they didn't win them all, but they played really well in these games. They had Alabama on the ropes. They knocked them all over the field. I think they're a really good turf team. I think their speed on turf really shows up. I think they're very comfortable there. I think going into this game that you would have to give them a slight edge in the fact that they're playing in a place that they just feel good about themselves when they walk in there and the way they played there. Haven't finished every game, but I think they're confident the way they play. The biggest problem for Georgia going into this game is can they match up? You can't ask your defense to completely shut down the LSU offense. You know, if I think you go into the game saying we got to get into the 30s scoring the football. And to me, the best way to start doing that, the LSU defense is stout inside. They play basically 3 almost nose tackles. And then after that, they have 2 corners, and then the rest on the field, they got 6 safeties on the field. Their linebackers are undersized. There's safeties all over. They're interchangeable parts. Stevens and Delpit, 2 really good football players, are not great cover players. So how do you get them involved? And to me, the best way for Georgia to slow down the LSU offense is to score and hold the ball. And I would attack on the edge. I would muscle them with Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson on the edge of this defense. They're undersized, and I try to see if I can get with the pin and pulls and the powers and the quick tosses that we watched Georgia run in past years. That's where I would start trying to attack this defense, see if you can distort it a little bit, and then pick them later with the play-action passes. Won't be easy, but at least it's a starting point.
All right, Gary Danielson, he will be on the call on CBS. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Bye-bye.
All right, let's bring in Barton Simmons to talk more about this game, the Cover 3 podcast. He's going to have the players to know, and we begin with one we are all very familiar with, DeAndre Swift, of course, a huge weapon for that Georgia offense. But, Barton, are they going to be able to rely on him for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole question. And typically I like to go with a little bit less mainstream players when I talk about these players to watch. And I think DeAndre Swift certainly fits the mainstream category. But the reason I bring him up is I think the health is such a concern here. And Georgia, look, he's not necessarily this workhorse for Georgia. They do have a flurry of backs that they platoon in and split the carries up significantly. But DeAndre Swift is the most dynamic player on that offense. He is that guy that when he touches the football, it just looks different. And so I think it is very important, especially given that Georgia's going to be a little bit limited at wide receiver. Lawrence Cager out. George Pickens out for the first half. So they need all the big plays that they can get. Offensively, DeAndre Swift possesses most of them. So I think his health, how active and effective he can be with that shoulder that he got banged up last week is going to be critical to Georgia's success on Saturday.
All right, Barton, we've talked all season about Georgia's defense, and one of the reasons it's so good is because of a guy by the name of Monty Rice. I was reading that he and safety J.R. Reed, they actually get together outside of practice 3 times per week to watch tape, and boy, is it paying off. What do we watch for from him in this game?
Yeah, I mean, he's a beast. The whole defense is so good. But I think when you look at LSU's offense and you try to combat all the different ways it can beat you, we know about what Justin Jefferson can do out of the slot and what Jamar Chase can do on the perimeter. I think the most critical part about defending LSU is sort of these hidden yards that you find in 2 areas. One, it's in the pass game to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, out of the backfield, those angle routes, those swing routes to the perimeter. Monty Rice is going to be the equalizer. He's going to have to be the guy that can corral Clyde Edwards-Helaire in space, that can be a matchup there. And secondarily, Joe Burrow. No one really talks about Joe Burrow as a run threat, but you look at Florida, that game, and the way Florida was able to slow LSU at times, where LSU was able to sort of pick Georgia apart, and Joe Burrow was able to get going was when he got outside the pocket and made some scramble plays with his legs. I think Monty Rice's ability to track down Joe Burrow in some of those non-scheme plays, some of those just sort of plays where Joe Burrow just gets outside the pocket and makes something happen, I think that's going to be really critical. So not just in the run game and just for his typical role in the middle of the defense, but as an equalizer in space as well is going to be huge.
All right, Barton, let's talk about Tyler Shelvin, 6'3", 346 pounds. Can we expect big things from this big guy?
I mean, LSU's going to need big things out of them. I mean, this is a speed team right now. It's sort of gone into more of finesse mode, and that's been driven by that offense, certainly. But defensively, doesn't quite hold up quite the same as it used to. And part of that is because of just sort of the direction of offenses around the country and around the SEC. But LSU still has some beef. You look at that svelte 340 pounds plus. This is a kid that's actually trimmed down into that. I mean, he showed up on campus in Baton Rouge, 370, 380 pounds. And really was out of shape. And I think he's gotten himself in great shape this year. He's had a huge season. And this is where you need that beat. You don't necessarily need him quite as much against some of these more wide open spread type teams, but against Georgia with those massive offensive linemen, the way Georgia is going to want to possess the football, and sort of play keep away from Joe Burrow and that offense, the defense to that is a guy like Tyler Shelvin that can get in there and go beef on beef, big on big, and shuck some of those offensive linemen and occupy some of those offensive linemen so the second-level guys can get to the football and make plays. I think his play is going to be huge. He's been a really good player on the defensive interior for LSU all season long, and they're going to need him on Saturday as well.
He's going to shelve some players. That's a grown-worthy joke. All right. Barton, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to check out the Cover 3 podcast. Don't shake your head, Brady. That was funny. Cover 3 podcast. Download it wherever you find podcasts. And by the way, they break things down the day after the game, either that night on Saturday or Sunday the next morning. You don't have to wait until Monday. All right, let's bring back the guy who's shaking his head at me, Brady Quinn.
Very corny. Very corny.
Was very corny.
Even for you.
I take them where I can get them, and that was one that came to me. Okay, let's talk about college football playoff rankings, because this is where my stomach hurts. Thinking about the implications not only of this game, but all of the other championship conference games that we have going on. You have your serious face now. Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, Georgia, Utah, Oklahoma. Look into your crystal ball, Brady.
It really comes down to that number 4 spot. And if the game goes how I think it's going to go, LSU beats Georgia, that eliminates Georgia from the equation. So then the next question becomes, who moves into that spot? And look, you're already going to know because the Pac-12 championship game is played Friday night. So Oklahoma and Baylor are both going to be watching that game thinking to themselves, okay, if Utah lays one on Oregon and it's an impressive, dominant win, I think you're going to see both those two teams, when they get up, keep their foot on the gas and try to make it as impressive as possible. My issue with Baylor is you're out. Even if you win, your non-conference schedule is too weak. I don't think they're going to get invited to the party if they win the Big 12. Oklahoma, different story. They're going to have 4 top 25 wins, much more impressive resume to present when they're being compared to Utah, if Utah was to win the Pac-12 championship. Only 2 wins over top 25 teams. Now, they have had a better point differential. I think when you look at Utah, they haven't been to that party yet, talking about the college football playoff. Oklahoma has. I think the one distortion between the two that people have kind of missed is we know Utah is a very complete football team. We don't know if they have the firepower that we see from the Oklahoma offense. But the other thing is this Oklahoma defense is number 1 in the Big 12. In total defense. People think that this team's not improved on defense. They have been. You know, they held TCU to just over 200 yards. Oklahoma State last week to 335 total yards, which is about 140 below their season average. So the past 2 weeks, they've been improved. Even since that second half of the Baylor game in that win, they've gotten 5 turnovers, a weak spot for this defense. So Oklahoma, to me, would have the better resume. And I think when you're comparing them, there is a common opponent. It's UCLA. And based on the criteria of the committee, you're not supposed to take into margin of victory where Oklahoma beat them 48-14. Utah beat UCLA 49-3. So I wouldn't want to be in that room if I'm the committee because I think they're going to have a hard time deciding between Utah and Oklahoma if this plays out the way we think it's going to. Because I think you could make a case for Utah based on how they've looked. They've been dominant. They haven't been to it yet. Maybe people would be curious to see how they'd match up versus maybe an Ohio State or Oklahoma. It's a team that has been there before. Has been in the national championship, though, but they've got the offensive firepower. They are improved on defense. So I don't know that you could go wrong in that case. I know that sounds like it's a cop-out, but bottom line is I think I really feel like both teams could be deserving depending on how you're looking at it. But I think if you're going based off your own criteria, your Oklahoma Sooners in that case should get in.
I'm going to the game. It is going to be very, very nerve-wracking. So even though Utah's been above Oklahoma, you think that they could jump them?
I think they would leapfrog them. They would have the better win. I mean, look, even in top 25 wins, but even in the conference championship, I mean, Baylor would be a better win. Not only are you beating them for your championship, but you've already beat them once before. Utah would be beating Oregon. They're a lesser-ranked team. I mean, if you compare the resumes, Oklahoma would have the better resume.
I'm not even going to go, what if LSU or Clemson loses? We're not even going to go there.
If LSU loses, then you're getting left out of the party.
Thank you. Thank you very much, the party. Okay, coming up next, you want to know how I know that my friend Tim Doyle is on a hot streak? That's because he messages me on Twitter to make sure that I know his picks cash. Look at that with the sunglasses. Get your hammer. We're going to see if he can hit the nail on the head with this game. Coming up. And welcome back to HQ. So there is the game we are talking about today. The Georgia Bulldogs and the LSU Tigers. I try to say that with a Louisiana accent. So the over-under on this is 54.5. LSU favored by 6.5. Do we agree? Do we disagree? For that, we're going to turn to Tim Doyle because he wants me to say specifically he is on a hot streak. He is making all the right picks. He cannot lose. Brady?
Yeah, he won last week. He picked the right. Apparently, Alabama needs to find a new field goal kicker because they can't make a kick to go into overtime.
All right, Doyle, what do you like here?
I like over here. I'm not a mathematician, but LSU averages 49 points a game, okay? Georgia averages 33 points a game. Now, I had a 2.2 GPA. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you right now, but 49 plus 33 equals 82. How is the over and under 54.5 points, 54 points? And by the way, Georgia needs to be aggressive. Georgia needs to win this game. Jake Fromm needs to throw the ball down the field. They can't sit back. LSU can lose this game. They're still in the playoff. This is just like a free game for them. Georgia needs to be aggressive. Georgia needs to throw the ball down the field. Fromm has done a great job this year taking care of the football. He only has 3 interceptions on the year. And why I believe this game is going to go over is because this ain't your mama and papa's defense on LSU. LSU gave up 38 to Texas. They gave up 38 to Vanderbilt. I'll repeat, 38 points to Vanderbilt, 28 to Florida, 41 to Alabama, 37 to Ole Miss. So in my eye, I think that Georgia's going to get 30 points. I think they're going to get 28. They're going to get somewhere in that ballpark. And the reality is when you go up against LSU, you can't stop them. Joe Burrow has too much time back there. He's too good a college quarterback to pick you apart. This is one of those games, Amanda. You take your rent check, you take your check from HQ, and you bet everything you have on the over. You double it up, and then what do? You rent a boat, you go out on South Beach, you have a great time because this is the biggest lock I've seen all SEC season. The over, the more you bet, the more you win.
It sounds great. It's a great pitch. You should be a salesman. I don't know if you ever have been one before, Tim, but you should be. Here's the problem with that math, okay? You're not taking into account the fact that the Georgia defense on average only gives up about 10 points, right? So, again, you have to factor in how this Georgia defense is going to play a factor, and I think this Georgia defense is most similar to what LSU faced versus Auburn. LSU won that game, 23-20. What's the over-under? What are we in the 50s there, 54.5, something like that?
54.5.
Yeah, that would add up to not equating to the over. Now, I am with Tim in this case where I do think LSU will score enough points. They're going to be the contributing factor to why this game will hit the over. I think Georgia will add some points, but I also think not having Pickens for the first half, not having Cager, we don't know the health of DeAndre Swift. There's a lot of ifs of whether or not Jake Fromm, this young group of receivers out around him, can put up enough production versus an LSU defense that, yes, has struggled, but at the same time plays a lot of man-to-man coverage, and when they need to make enough plays, they have. So I don't think this is as big of a lock as Mr. Doyle is making it out to believe, but I agree with him. I do think it'll hit the over, but it may actually be closer to being a nail-biter there, Doyle.
All right, Tim, LSU favored by 6.5 here, and I have in my notes specifically, he likes Georgia, ... a little.
Yeah, I actually had liked LSU, and then the more I thought about it, I flipped my pick to Georgia. So that just tells you right there that, this is a tough game. And the way LSU has just lit up everybody, it's almost hard to go against them because from an offensive standpoint, Brady knows this, and you can just look at the numbers. I mean, second in scoring offense and explosive, and Burrow's going to win the Heisman this year. So, if you're betting against them, you're asking for it. I think LSU, and I'm being serious, I think they could go get 55 by themselves. And the fact that the total's only 54.5, but I think that Georgia's going to be able to score. I think Georgia's going to try to be aggressive because they need to go out and win this game. I just can't visualize this being a defensive struggle. Obviously, those numbers are going to point to it, but there's so much time. And with all those stop clock in first downs in college football, and by the way, I'm hot. And sometimes you just roll with the hot hand. You just give Doyle the pick. You get out of his way. I call it a Carmelo Anthony clear out. You just clear out, take the over. As far as the game, I do think it's a tough choice. I'll lean towards Georgia, but no strong opinion.
You're a good Irishman, Doyle. You know this. Murphy's Law, man. What can and it can happen will happen at some point. And I think eventually you'll end up cooling off. In this one, I like LSU. I think if this game's going to go over like you're talking about, again, it's largely because LSU is going to put up enough points. Georgia's not going to be able to keep pace with them, not be able to keep this close. If Georgia ends up being able to cover that number and you're taking the 6.5 in this case, it's probably more of a low-scoring game. They're probably running the football well. They're probably playing really good defense and not allowing LSU to put up quite as many points. And we're looking at more of an LSU-Auburn type of game. So I like LSU. I like the over in this case. So I think we agree, at least on half of this. Maybe you're a little bit off there.
Well, I'll agree with this. I actually weigh the same as I did when I played. But when I played, I used to have muscle. Now I have like a dad bod, like a belly and stuff. I looked up pictures of you recently, Brady. You look like you've lost a lot of weight. Is that true?
I weigh the exact same.
Why are you looking up pictures of Brady?
It's weird. I would be thinking you'd be looking up pictures of other people.
This is when I know that it's time for us to let Tim Doyle go. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pound the over.
All right, there you go. Do not miss it. He likes the over. He likes Georgia a little bit. Brady likes LSU. Make your own picks. But do not miss this game. Georgia LSU SEC Championship, 4 Eastern on CBS.